Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that's honestly a bit hard to stomach but impossible to look away from. Tonight, we'll wander through the damp corridors of the Spanish palace, where a beautiful, powerful queen was infamous for never changing her underwear. Yes, you heard that right. While the entire kingdom was wrapped in incense, silks, and ceremony. Beneath those gold-embroidered gowns lay a secret, so pungent that history simply couldn't ignore it. Some say that this very habit of long-term no-washing sparked a deadly epidemic that spread from the royal court to the common people. Hearing this, you might be wondering, would I survive in this reign? The gentle answer is, no. You wouldn't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are. I'd really love to know who's staying up late with me on this strange night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Under the flickering candlelight of a Habsburg-era palace, you can picture a silence so heavy, it feels almost alive. Thick stone walls, soaring ceilings, and tapestries, heavy with crucifix motifs. But what made many courtiers frown, though none dared to speak it aloud, had nothing to do with politics or royal ceremony. It was the smell, a musty, damp, clinging odor, like an invisible curse, surrounding the throne where a powerful queen of Spain sat, Isabella of Portugal, wife of Emperor Charles V. You might wonder, how could a woman praised as gentle, virtuous, and even canonized as a saint become the subject of a late-night story about underwear not changed for years? The answer lies not in eccentricity, but in an old notion of purity. At that time in Catholic Europe, especially among royalty and clergy, there was a widespread belief the less one touched the body, the closer one was to God. Many noble women believed that bathing too often was a sign of moral decay, and never changing underwear, odd as it may sound to you today, was once considered an act of noble chastity, even praised in medieval moral writings. Yes, wearing the same garment all winter without washing meant you were triumphing over worldly temptation. Only, bacteria did not care about faith. Many researchers believe that Isabella's habit, and later that of other Spanish noblewomen, unintentionally turned the court into a breeding ground for disease. In a sealed, humid environment, with the stability of fabric untouched for months, bacteria and parasites flourished. Some modern medical historians even hypothesize that outbreaks of diarrhea, rashes, and possibly cholera in the 16th century court may have stemmed from these less than fragrant hygiene customs. Now you see why some call it the Holy Plague. Right. Of course, not everyone agrees. Historians still debate the extent of the Queen's unchanging ways. Some say it was just an exaggeration by opponents of the Habsburgs, especially chroniclers from England and France, nations in a sibling rivalry with Spain at the time. Some scholars even argue that Isabella was so strict she followed a ritual of praying before changing clothes. Who's right, who's exaggerating, no one knows for sure. But court medical records from the 1532nd, 1552nd note chronic itching in the intimate areas, recurring rashes, and unexplained foul odors in the Queen's chambers. Descriptions that would make modern doctors set their coffee down and rethink breakfast. Ironically, Isabella was never scorned. On the contrary, she was respected as a model of virtue, even hailed as the Maiden of the Faith. Born into the Portuguese royal family, she married Emperor Charles V to unite two great empires. They lived somewhat apart, Charles often at war or in papal councils, Isabella managing the household with the severity of an abbess. She never wore lipstick, avoided bright clothing, and always travelled with 3 ladies in waiting to ensure she spoke to no one outside of Scripture. Picture it if Netflix made a series about her. Every episode would be prayers, incense rituals, and going to bed in a gown buttoned to the chin. Sadly, not a single scene would involve changing underwear. A lesser-known anecdote claims the Queen believed changing clothes too often would make the soul loose literally. She thought that if fabric touched the skin too many times, negative forces could seep into the body, rendering the mind impure for conversation with God. This comes from the diary of a nun who served her, now kept in an old convent in Avila. Believe it or not, you might start looking at your washing machine with more gratitude. So, was Isabella truly the spark for an epidemic? Not entirely. But in the context of 16th century Spain, when medicine had no grasp of germs, and the court lived as a sealed-off world, a single person with such medieval hygiene could easily become a vector for mysterious illnesses, especially when that person was the center of ritual life, constantly surrounded by nobles, courtiers, and ladies. Many of them died from strange fevers just months after religious processions where she played the leading role. And hey, don't judge her too harshly. Even today, there are people who sleep in the same socks for 3 days or don't change pillowcases for 3 weeks. History might be chuckling at us. 2. You're walking through a 16th century Spanish royal palace. Cool high walls, crimson carpets, and each step echoes as if disturbing the sleep of old ghosts. But you're not alone. Around you lingers the legacy Isabella left behind. Not gold, not laws, not poetry, but another kind of inheritance, a legacy of smell. When she died in 1539, her death was recorded as due to complications after childbirth. Though physicians at the time did not rule out chronic infection, records from the convent where she was sent to recover describe total physical decline. Discrete necrosis in private areas details modern medicine links to severe hygiene-related infections. Bitter, isn't it? A woman hailed as the model of Catholic virtue. 1. Every future queen was expected to emulate, dying in isolation, in weakness, and in a stench no one dared mention. Do you remember the tale of Sleeping Beauty, awakened by a true love's kiss? In Isabella's case, perhaps no one dared get close enough. After her death, Charles V, the mighty emperor who ruled across Europe and fought in countless campaigns, fell into deep depression. He retired to the monastery of Yuste, spending his final years in silence, wearing monk's robes. Some historians say it was grief for a wife he respected. Though they lived apart, others dryly remark, he lived in the incense of the monastery to forget the scent of the queen. Just kidding. But you see, history always has 2 layers. One gilded and glorious, and another quietly reeking. Strangely enough, although the anecdotes about Isabella's hygiene habits have long been met with skepticism, her influence on royal life was very real. After her reign, a wave of ascetic devotion swept through the Spanish court. Many noble women copied the habit of bathing less and changing clothes rarely, believing it was a way to guard themselves against carnal temptation, a sort of spiritual fashion trend, if you will. But instead of lipstick or perfume, they carried gloom and mildew. In the royal household, ladies in waiting would often stuff dried herbs into bodices or waistbands to mask odors. Some even believed that inhaling the queen's body odor was an act of purification. Think of it as a Renaissance version of a spiritual detox. There's an intriguing scholarly debate surrounding Isabella's final portrait. In the painting, she wears a white robe, faccia serene, hands clasped in prayer. But costume experts have pointed out a strange detail. The innermost skirt appears to have stiffened, as if something had seeped into it. No one dares to confirm anything. But you know how it is in history. Silence is often the most delicate way to state an uncomfortable truth. Some believe that the severity, suffocating atmosphere, and silent endurance of pain she embodied shaped later generations. Her son Philip II became known as a stern, melancholy king, obsessed with sin and God's punishment. Many psychohistorians suggest Philip grew up in a space heavy with forbidden scents, where emotions were repressed and the body itself was treated as sinful. It's no surprise that the Spanish court later became famous for coldness, strict ceremony, and little emotion. And, of course, little soap. Isn't it funny? A single pair of unwashed underwear, unlikely to kill anyone instantly, could spark a cultural ripple that lasted centuries, influencing everything from royal psychology to religious policy, from poetry to monastic architecture. Truly, a soft power everyone wanted to keep at arm's length. And now, as you wrap yourself in a clean blanket, ready to drift off in a room scented with fabric softener, spare a thought for the courtiers who had to stand beside Isabella through ceremonies lasting 3 hours. None of them lived to tell the tale, but perhaps the smell still lingers, echoing through the stone corridors where history still whispers with every breath. In the shimmering light from stained glass windows, you can picture the noble ladies of the court sitting around their dressing tables. But don't expect Chanel powder or Dior foundation. Instead, you'd find rows of old porcelain jars filled with chalky white powders, animal fat perfumes, and a hint of danger. Makeup then wasn't meant to make you beautiful, but to prove your virtue. Skin as pale as porcelain was not only a sign of nobility, but proof I don't work under the sun. I belong to God. Thus, face powders were often made from crushed white lead mixed with vinegar or egg. Yes, you heard that right. Lead the heavy metal we now avoid as carefully as we avoid old smells in a wardrobe. Arch mourning, noble women would dip a cloth into the mixture, wiping it over the face, neck, and sometimes even the hands. The result, skin as pale as carved stone, the beauty standard of the day. The only problem, lead dried and burned the skin, eventually eating away at the muscles beneath. But no one dared to speak out, for suffering in the name of God was to be revered. An eyeliner, no waterproof mascara. Instead, soot mixed with olive oil or saliva. Yes, you heard right. A dip, a stroke, a soft breath, and there you had lashes, seductive enough to make a king sigh. But if your hand trembled just a little, sorry, you'd look like you'd cried all night at a baptism. Lip color was made from crushed flower petals or cinnabar mercury sulfide, a mineral with a blood-red hue. But, with long-term use, lips dried like winter bark. Beautiful. Yes, but sipping soup became risky. Each smile was a statement of courage. A strange, little-known tale says that once, when Queen Isabella appeared at Mass, the white powder on her face was so thick that a patch on her left cheek fell away like old plaster. No one dared laugh, but a young page later whispered to his mother, "The Virgin Mary's face in church looks more real than the Queen's." Just a bit of folk humor. But you see now, beauty back then was built on layers of chemicals and endurance, not cushion compacts or collagen. Historians still debate whether these beauty standards originated from Catholic doctrine, the influence of the French court, or simply from the notion that everyone does it, so I must too. But whatever the reason, you can't deny one thing: being beautiful back then was exhausting. You see, self-care in the Middle Ages was anything but gentle. Each morning's makeup routine wasn't just decoration, it was a religious, political, and social ritual. A single misstep was an offense against heaven and earth. Not just the mirror. You know, in the 16th century, bathing wasn't as simple as stepping into a hot shower and choosing between lavender or coconut body wash. Back then, bathing was considered dangerous. Truly dangerous. People believed warm water would open the pores, gateways for evil air, disease, and even demons to enter the body. So the higher one's social rank, the less they bathed. Queen Isabella was famously said to have bathed only twice in her life, once at birth, and once on her wedding day to King Ferdinand, and this, believe it or not, was considered a sign of sanctity. But you think she did nothing to manage the smell? Not at all. In the royal court, instead of bathing, noble women practiced what was called dry hygiene. First came scented powder, a mix of dried herbs like basil, sage, lavender, blended with talc or mineral powder. Each morning, ladies in waiting would dust this over the noble woman's entire body, neck, armpits, back, even between the toes. With every movement, the powder would waft up, creating an artificial scent like perfume in dust form. Next came scented cloth. Instead of changing underwear, they would tuck small pieces of fabric soaked in rose vinegar or wine vinegar into the dress. Under the arms, at the waist. This acted as a primitive form of personal deodorant. The problem was, when temperatures rose, these damp cloths became perfect breeding grounds for mold and bacteria without anyone realizing it. Another thing, few think about the hair. Have you ever imagined brushing hair that hasn't been washed in months? Court ladies styled their hair into elaborate buns or braids, then covered it with silk veils or caps. They would sprinkle scented powder onto the hair, but actual washing was rare. Washing hair could take an entire day heating water, preparing herbal oils, drying, then warming over embers. Too many steps, and it was thought to pose a health risk. It's said that some nobles washed their hair only once a year, for a major feast. Afterward, the maids would have to clean creature remains from the hair, not unlike clearing out a bird's nest in winter. A strange little-known tale for a time in the inner court. The maids were ordered to rotate sleeping arrangements weekly, not for feng shui, but to avoid breathing the same body odor night after night. They would take turns sleeping near members of the royal family, according to an exact scent schedule. Thus, whoever slept closest to the queen this week would be freed the next, like swapping shifts in a factory of ancient smells. And do you know what happened during their monthly cycle? No sanitary pads, no tampons. Instead, royal women used reusable cloth rags tied in place with fabric belts. These rags were washed by hand in cold water, as warm water was thought to spread toxic blood, dried, and reused the following month. A cycle of rebirth in the truest sense. Historians still argue over how often these cloths were actually washed, since royal records are vague, but much folk medical writing notes that midwives often did not wash them immediately, preferring to air them to dispel negative energy. The result, you guessed it, a musty odor, worsened by Europe's damp weather. One curious fact, no one was allowed to criticize the Queen's scent. There was even an unspoken rule: if a courtier so much as frowned while standing near her, he would be sent on a pilgrimage for a month. Some say it was a punishment. Others say it was a reward. So you see, in the shimmering light and echoing prayers of that era, there were still things that were very earthly. Personal hygiene, something we think of as private, became an entire system of ritual, belief, and silent endurance. And if today you've just had a hot shower with lemon-scented body wash, dried yourself with a soft cotton towel, then spritzed on a few drops of perfume, congratulations! You're living like a king, at least compared to a queen of old. If you imagine that the Spanish royal household in the Middle Ages had private, discreet, well-lit flush toilets, allow me to gently wake you with a chamber pot. Yes, in the 15th, 16th centuries, instead of a toilet, people used a commode chair, a wooden seat with a hole in the middle, beneath which sat a porcelain, metal, or brass-pot. These chairs were often placed right in the bedroom, next to velvet curtains or by the fireplace. You heard that right, no separate bathrooms. Even the Queen sat on a pot in her room, just steps away from where she read her prayers. But not everyone was allowed to go alone. The Queen or noble ladies were often assisted by someone called the Dame of the Stool, a title that outranked many advisors. Because she knew every secret, every sound, every smell. The Dame of the Stool's duties included holding up a cloth to ensure the Queen's privacy, bringing the commode, checking it was clean, wiping and washing the Queen afterward, yes, noting any signs of ill health if observed. Some historians joke that if you wanted to know whether the country was on the brink of war, you didn't check the army ledgers. You read the Dame of the Stool's diary. Now, about disposal. You might imagine the pot being carried away and emptied, but where out the window? Of course, in many Spanish castles, especially old stone fortresses, there were narrow shafts in the walls called chutes, used to dump waste into a drainage channel outside. In winter, it froze into pale yellow icicles. If there was no chute, the simpler method was straight onto the cobbled street below. Pedestrians had to stay alert, especially when they heard a soft thud and the familiar warning cry, "Agua va, water's coming." A little-known story once, during a reception for a French envoy, the smell in the royal hall grew so strong that they burned 300 sticks of incense, hanging them on chairbacks to mask the stench of unemptied pots. And of course, the envoy still fainted midway through the ceremony, not from emotion. You should also know there was no toilet paper, none at all. Instead, people used reusable linen, soft, but hand-washed in cold water, clean dry grass or moss, especially when traveling. And sometimes, the left hand then washed with vinegar and salt water. This is why, in medieval paintings, the left hand is often hidden behind the back, while the right hand is the clean one used for handshakes, holding candles, or carrying a crucifix. Historians still debate whether this lack of hygiene awareness was due to superstition, or simply because material conditions didn't allow for more. Some say the nobility weren't bothered by body odor because everyone smelled the same. Human scent became normal, a kind of equal opportunity stench. And if you're wondering what happened with those giant, hooped dresses worn by noble women, the kind that took 3 people to put on, here's the secret. The front panel was often left open, or designed for quick release. Some queens mastered the skill of doing the deed in 90 seconds, without spilling a single drop of the rosewater tucked into their collars. So you see, royal life beneath its glittering facade was also full of very real smells. But in that mixture of herbs, scented powders, rituals, and church bells, there was still something deeply human, pitiable at times, and occasionally downright funny. Now close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Enjoy the clean air, the hot water, the grapefruit-scented soap, the triple-ply paper, and the gentle flush of a modern toilet. Because if you are sitting in a modern bathroom, you are living like the emperor of all ages. The bedroom of Queen Isabella I of Castile, in theory, a sacred private space where she prayed, rested, and fulfilled her royal duties. But don't rush to imagine a modern, luxurious bedroom with crisp white sheets, golden lamplight, and a cloud-soft spring mattress. No, it was a different world, one where the bed itself was a political institution. That's right. Her bed wasn't just for sleeping. It was where the question of succession was decided, where ministers were allowed to enter in the morning if there was urgent business, where physicians took the Queen's pulse when she had a stomachache, and where, naturally, she had to lie to prove she had completed her marital duty in the presence of at least one lady in waiting. Still lying comfortably, beds in Isabella's time were often large 4-posters, carved from heavy oak, With canopies draped in thick red or dark blue velvet, they weren't just to keep out drafts, but to shield from prying eyes. And the mattress a layer of straw, topped with burlap. Then a feather mattress, unevenly soft and quick to develop unpleasant odors if not regularly aired. Pillows were stuffed with feathers, but sometimes with human hair, taken from ladies in waiting who had sacrificed their hair for the Queen, a mark of loyalty. Something few know: sharing a bed was not an every-night event. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella had a bed-sharing schedule, decided by the Royal Medical Council. They consulted her menstrual calendar, mental state, health, and even astrology to choose the best time for conception. When that night came, the bedroom was prepared like a small ceremony. Candles were lit throughout, the velvet curtains drawn, and the ladies in waiting withdrew, according to strict protocol. Believe it or not, the entire occasion was recorded in the court diary as an important document. Historians still debate whether this supervision of the marital bed was due to religious belief, royal control, or an obsession with pure bloodlines. But whatever the reason, you have to admit, never before had going to bed carried so much political weight. Now for something few dare to say snoring. In a letter between two ladies in waiting from Isabella's time, one wrote of a night when the Queen could not rest, because His Majesty Ferdinand snored like rolling thunder. No one dared say it publicly. But the next night, the Queen moved to her own chamber, citing a need to focus on prayer. From then on, they often slept apart, meeting only when there was a political reason. Don't think it was only men who snored. Some records say the Queen, in deep sleep, made a faint wheezing sound like a kitten, but lasting as though it were a whisper from God. A romanticized image only the servants dared mention in private letters. A little-known story once. During several days of fever, Queen Isabella sweated so much that the mattress had to be changed twice in one night. But because royal protocol forbade changing the bed at midnight, the ladies had to scatter herbs over it to mask the smell. It's said that this scent, part lavender, part pure human essence, lingered in the velvet fabric for many years after. You see, the royal bed was never the warm, restful place you see in films. It was a stage of power, where there was no privacy, where even scents were remembered as part of history. And if you're lying on a clean bed right now, with no one supervising you, no one taking notes, no cobwebs on the canopy, and no risk of a candle setting your hair alight, then you are far happier than Queen Isabella ever was. Just stay there. Don't jump up or open your eyes too wide, because what comes next is even more surprising than a royal bed being recorded in a ledger: the royal nightgown. It sounds luxurious, smooth as celestial silk, but in reality, what Queen Isabella wore each night before sleep was nothing like you imagine. It was made from coarse linen, sometimes mixed with hemp fibers, because it was believed that natural materials warded off evil spirits and kept the soul pure. A very historical way of saying she was going to sweat buckets. This nightgown had no lace, no buttons, just a long, pale strip of fabric tied loosely with a thin belt. The only thing considered luxury was a small embroidered motif at the neckline, perhaps a cross, or a line of Latin prayer, hand-stitched by the Queen herself or the court nuns. For sleep, in the thinking of the time, was not for pleasure, but for silent communion with God. A little-known story. One cold winter night in 1496, when influenza was sweeping through the court, the Queen secretly slipped out of her main bedchamber without warning. She wore her plain nightgown, threw on a rough cloak, and crept to a small room near the kitchens, once the quarters of a deceased servant. Why? She wanted to sleep alone, without prayers, without a hand checking her pulse, without holy water sprinkled on her forehead. In the diary of a loyal lady in waiting, it is written, that night, Her Grace laughed for the first time in many months. She said the smell of burning wood and bread was lovelier than any perfume of the court. A queen. fleeing the bed of power, just to close her eyes in peace. You see, now for us, sleep is just sleep. But for a medieval queen, it was a performance between faith, politics, and the body, and the nightgown, thought to be the last shield of privacy, was sometimes the final thread binding them to the crown. Can you imagine it? A morning in November 1504. The skies over Medina del Campo grey, as if the heavens themselves wore mourning clothes. No music echoed through the castle. Only the sound of soft cloth slippers worn by nuns. And prayers murmured like the breathing of grief. The body of Queen Isabella lay in a pine coffin, ungilded, unadorned, exactly as she had willed. She demanded a funeral so simple it shocked the entire court. For she wanted nothing of the proud death of other monarchs. She wished to return to God as a humble believer. Her shroud was not of brocade. It was a monastic cloak, prepared by her own hands, long before a piece of ash-grey cloth, worn at the shoulders, embroidered in black thread with the words, "Thou art dust, and to dust I shall return." Historians still debate whether her original wish to be buried in the austere monastery of San Pedro de la Espina was sincere or merely a religious gesture to fortify her image. However, after her death, her remains were moved to the royal monastery of Granada, as per the wishes of her daughter, Queen Joanna, and thus began a royal funeral procession spanning 600 kilometers, taking weeks, through forests, mountain pass, and villages, not in a gold-gilded carriage, but in a wooden cart draped in black cloth, pulled by 4 white mules, the same animals that had once carried her on her rounds to inspect hospitals. Along the route, people gathered not to wail as was customary, but to stand in silence, placing hands over their hearts and bowing their heads. For Isabella was not just a queen. She was the founder of a united Spain, the monarch who authorized Columbus's voyage, a figure both revered and controversial. Some Jews who had been expelled even stood watching the cortege pass in choked silence, knowing that the woman in that coffin had once signed a decree that altered the fate of millions. When they reached Granada, the last Muslim city to fall to Catholic rule under her reign, the funeral stopped at the royal chapel Capilla Real. It was here, beneath the cold marble, that her remains were placed beside King Ferdinand after his death. But do you know what was strange? Although laid to rest in the royal crypt, Isabella's coffin was not sealed with lead like those of other monarchs. She had instructed, "I am a woman born in the light. Let me decay in the light." A request, poetic enough to send a shiver down the spine. And they say the scent of pine resin from the wooden coffin, the smoke of incense burning day and night, mingled with the cold breath of the tomb and the rustle of monks at prayer, created an atmosphere so sacred that anyone passing by felt a pang in the heart. The last person to leave the crypt was her daughter Joanna the Mad, who never accepted her mother's death. Records say Joanna returned to the chapel every week for 6 months, standing for hours by her mother's tomb, whispering as if in conversation. And so it was. The Queen departed this world in a strange ceremony. No pomp, no trumpets, but quietly carved into the nation's memory. A death both saintly and full of contradictions like her life itself. In Isabella's time, disease was no different from a curse. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics. Even the concept of bacteria was still a distant luxury. People believed illness came from bad air, from God's punishment, or worse, from witches. And the terrifying thing, all of these ideas were used to justify the very real suffering caused by plague. Smallpox, malaria, syphilis, and cholera, invisible killers that spared neither king nor commoner. When Isabella ascended the throne in 1474, Spain was already enduring recurring waves of deadly outbreaks. The Black Death, which had ravaged Europe in the mid-14th century, had never entirely released its grip on the Iberian Peninsula. In cities like Seville, Granada, and Valladolid. The stench of filth, garbage, dead rats, and stagnant wastewater pooling at the base of stone walls created the perfect environment for disease to thrive. And now, let me tell you how they cured illness. A journey between faith and desperation. Have a cough and fever. Under Isabella's rule, a physician might place a leech on your neck and say, "We must cleanse the bad blood." Bloodletting was so common it became the default. People believed the body worked on 4 humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Out of balance, cut a vein, bleed it out. Apply cabbage leaves to the forehead. Burn fragrant herbs. Or place camphor under the bed and pray. If you were a noble, you might receive more luxurious treatments, inhaling rosewater mixed with vinegar, drinking wine infused with violet flowers, or bathing in water boiled with gold and silver, believing precious metals would impart noble energy. And if you had a rash and fever, the doctor might burn bay leaves in the room, then give you a cloth soaked in musk oil to press to your chest. But don't think royalty was immune. Isabella herself faced outbreaks. In 1503, while her husband King Ferdinand was campaigning in Naples, the region was struck by a mysterious fever that killed thousands of Spanish soldiers. Isabella ordered the best physicians sent to the front and called upon Franciscan nuns known for caring for the sick. She also established mobile medical stations, precursors to the modern military medical corps. It was during her reign that religion and medicine fused to form the foundation of the first hospitals. Each hospital was paired with a chapel where prayer, confession, and penance were considered essential parts of the healing process. Many believed illness came from sin, and repentance was the way to cleanse the body. And there was another special enemy that appeared toward the end of her life: syphilis. This terrible disease spread like wildfire across Europe after Spanish soldiers returned from their campaigns. At first, they called it the French disease, then the Naples disease. Everyone tried to blame someone else. The cure: bathing in mercury. Yes, mercury. Rubbing it on the skin, inhaling its vapors, or applying it to the teeth without knowing they were poisoning themselves. Isabella was deeply concerned about the wave of sickness, and in her final years, she banned extramarital relations at court, promoting virtue as a moral medicine to curb the spread of syphilis. You see, in that world, medicine was not science, it was part of religion, philosophy, superstition, and kindness. There were nuns who never left the side of the sick, blind physicians who tried to distinguish medicines by smell, vatnurses, mothers, wives quietly brewing remedies, cooling foreheads, praying and dying alongside their loved ones in outbreaks. And Isabella, though a queen, was not immune to such fears. The last letters she wrote to her daughter Catherine of Aragon, later Queen of England, were full of reminders: take care of your health. Avoid dirty water. Do not let your soul grow weary from the illness of the body. Imagine yourself living in the late 15th century, in a small village in central Spain. Each morning, as the church bells rang far away under a misty sky, everyone in the village stopped their work, removed their hats, bowed their heads, and whispered a prayer. No one questioned it. No one resisted. For in Queen Isabella's time, the religion was not only faith, it was order, law, the way of life, the framework surrounding every breath. As a woman devout to the very core of her soul, Isabella believed the stability of the realm must begin with the purity of faith. From childhood, she had been raised in strict convents, where the rhythm of prayer was like breathing. Upon ascending the throne, she was not only a queen, but the guardian of her people's faith. And to achieve this, Isabella, together with her husband, King Ferdinand, forged a closed Catholic kingdom, where only one religion was allowed to exist openly: Roman Catholicism. From then on, the shadow of the church marked every corner of life. A child at birth had to be baptized immediately, A couple wishing to marry needed a priest's blessing. The sick and dying had to confess before God to rest in peace. And when they died, the tolling of the funeral bell followed them to the grave. The church was not only a place of prayer, but a school, a hospital, a court, a repository of memory and law. Not a single act from eating, dressing, marrying, to even frowning lay outside the reach of canon law. But of course, not everyone was fortunate enough to stand beneath the light of the cross. For while the Queen built a unified kingdom through faith, those who were different or merely appeared different were deemed a threat. It was Isabella who signed the decree establishing the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. Have you heard of the Inquisition? It was no legend but a chilling reality. One could be arrested simply for being suspected of lighting candles on a Friday, following old dietary customs, or whispering a prayer in Hebrew. Especially the converted Jews known as conversos, who were always watched with suspicion. In 1492, the same year, Isabella sponsored Christopher Columbus's voyage. She also signed another, far darker decree, the expulsion of all Jews from Spain. It was called an act for the purity of faith. But in truth, it was a tragedy. Tens of thousands of families were driven from their homeland, carrying books, possessions, and tears. They had to choose, convert, or go into exile. And those who converted, no matter how they lived, could rarely escape the scrutiny of the Inquisition, all in the name of a single ideal: one God, one kingdom, one faith. You see, under Isabella, religion was not only about saving souls, it was a political tool. But don't be too quick to condemn her. For in that era, nearly every monarch did the same. The difference was that Isabella did it better, more decisively, and more comprehensively, and alongside repression. She left positive legacies as well. She ordered the Bible to be translated into Castilian, so her people could understand God's word in their native tongue. She authorized the building of Catholic universities, which trained generations of clergy, lawyers, and physicians closely tied to religious doctrine, yet also opening a form of formal education for Spain's Renaissance-era intellectual class. Religion also traveled with the armies to the New World. When Columbus reached the Americas, crosses were raised almost alongside the Spanish flagpoles. Franciscan and Dominican friars accompanied the knights, spreading the faith, converting the natives sometimes with sermons, sometimes with chains. Faith in God was used to justify both kindness and conquest. Yet among the ashes, there were also gentle candles. Not everyone was cruel. In the small hospitals run by nuns, one could see true compassion. Women quietly anointed the dying with oil, read prayers for the illiterate, brought blankets to lepers, and even in the palace, where Isabella penned decrees steeped in power, she once wrote to her daughter Catherine, later Queen of England, "There is nothing more noble than a pure soul, and nothing more dangerous than a heart that no longer knows how to pray." So you see, Isabella's era was a complicated one where the light of religion guided the way, but sometimes also blinded the eyes. A time when faith was a source of comfort, a moral foundation, and at the same time, an iron whip striking those who thought differently. It was within this contradiction that Isabella's image became both great and more controversial than ever. It was late November, 1504. Winter winds swept across the fields of Castile. The olive trees stood bare. The earth cracked and dry after an autumn without rain. And in the aging fortress at Medina del Campo, an exhausted queen lay on a carved oak bed, surrounded by prayers and the faint scent of burning musk from the incense burner. Isabella, the woman who had subdued the last Muslim dynasty in Granada, who had restored Catholic power, who had brought Spain into the age of global exploration, was now only a frail body, racked with illness, her eyes clouded, her lips as dry as ash. The strange illness had tormented her for months, Some said kidney failure. Others whispered uterine cancer. And some believed it was the spiritual pain from family losses that had drained her strength. And in that room, religion, her lifelong companion, had become the final cloak she wrapped tightly around herself as death drew near. She summoned priests every morning. Not a word of complaint. Only prayer. At times, she was seen straining to push herself upright in bed, just to hear passages from the Latin Bible she had memorized since childhood. Whenever the priest read verses about mercy, tears would fall not from fear of dying, but from her desire to be forgiven for what she had done in the name of God, but also in the name of power. She had the jewels from her crown sold, using the money to aid the poor and to atone for the harsh sentences of the Inquisition. She did not renounce her faith, nor doubt her decisions, but she understood compassion and mercy must stand beside faith in the final hour. In her last letters to her husband King Ferdinand and her daughter Catherine, she wrote, "I do not fear death, only that my heart may not be pure enough when I stand before him," a statement both firm and trembling, like her soul itself, caught between glory and repentance. She also made sure to pass on her entire spiritual legacy to continue defending Catholicism, to continue spreading the faith to new lands. But to remember this when acting in God's name, one must never act in the name of hatred. It was her final counsel, simple yet weighty. And then, on the cold morning of the 26th of November, Itenwubailingsi, in the dim light filtering through the chapel's stained glass windows, Isabella drew her last breath. There was no trumpet of victory, no crown upon her head, only the wooden crucifix in her hands worn smooth from being held too long, and the Ave Maria whispered from the lips of the nuns at her bedside. Her funeral was held according to full Catholic royal protocol, but it was far simpler than what a monarch would normally receive. While still alive, she had insisted she did not want an extravagant funeral. Her coffin was made of pine, covered in white cloth, with no gold leaf, nor jewels. She was buried in the Capilla Real, the royal chapel in Granada, beside her future husband, Ferdinand. She chose that place not for its beauty, but for its meaning. The city that had been the last Muslim capital in Spain was now the eternal resting place of the two Catholics who had united the kingdom. The crowds who came to bid her farewell stretched for miles. Some prayed quietly. Some wept. Some stood still in the cold wind, whether they loved her or hated her. Everyone knew an era had ended. And my friend, when the night has grown deep, perhaps what remains in our minds is not the harshness of a queen, but the image of a woman in her final moments, cleansing her soul through prayers of repentance, through compassion, and through an unwavering faith. So, if you ever fear the cruelty of history, remember this even in the darkest places. There can be a candle burning quietly, and sometimes that light comes from the very person who once ordered the flames to consume others. It is something sad, human, and deeply human. After Queen Isabella passed away at the end of 1504, the entire Kingdom of Spain was shaken, not only because it had lost a powerful ruler, but because a period of instability, grief, and uncertainty lay ahead. The throne now passed to her eldest daughter, Joanna of Castile, known to history by a name full of shadows, Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Picture that moment, the court standing solemnly beneath the stone vaults of Medina del Campo's palace, the winter sky grey and shrouded in mist, all eyes fixed on a slight woman with red-rimmed eyes from crying, her hair loose and tangled in mourning. This was Joanna, the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand, now Queen of Castile. But not long after she took the throne, the entire kingdom began to realize something was not right. Joanna, a flickering candle in the storm of power. She had once been an intelligent princess, well-educated, fluent in several languages, and skilled with musical instruments. She married Philip the Handsome, son of Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, a strategic alliance binding Spain to the powerful Austrian Habsburgs, meant to encircle France. But from the time she became his wife, Joanna lived in misery. She loved her husband with fierce devotion, and he, in return, was unfaithful, cold, and dismissive. Whenever Philip strayed, Joanna did not bear it in silent noblewoman's dignity. She screamed, wept, smashed objects in the night, even once tearing the dress off her husband's mistress in the middle of a festival. The court whispered, "The Queen has gone mad." When Isabella died, Joanna inherited the crown of Castile. But Ferdinand, her father, did not believe his daughter was mentally fit to rule. He wished to keep the regency in his own hands. Ironically, Philip, Joanna's husband, refused to be left out as well. He sailed from Flanders to Castile, declaring himself Rey de Castilla, King of Castile, on the grounds that, as the Queen's husband, he had the right to govern in her name. And so Ferdinand and Philip, two men, one old, one young, began a battle for the throne. With Joanna caught squarely in the middle, Philip the handsome, a short reign, and a mysterious death. When he arrived in Spain, Philip brought with him a Flemish entourage and a modern European-style lavish clothes, nights of dancing, a disdain for the conservative Castilian nobility. He worked to remove those loyal to Ferdinand and seize the regency from his own wife, whom he constantly claimed was not of sound mind. And then the unexpected happened. Only 2 months after being recognized as king, Philip fell gravely ill after a game of pelota. It is said he drank a cold beverage, while drenched in sweat, then developed a high fever, vomited blood, became delirious, and died. The whole kingdom was stunned. Rumors spread that Ferdinand had poisoned him. Others claimed it was the result of typhoid fever. But Joanna was different. She refused to believe her husband was dead. In her grief, she clung to his body, forbade anyone from burying him, and had Philip's corpse embalmed and placed in a glass coffin so she could look at his face every day. The endless funeral procession, and the madness without end. For many months afterward, Joanna refused to stay in one place. She and her entourage wandered endlessly across Castile, carrying her husband's coffin in what seemed like a ghostly procession. Some nights, she had the coffin opened, combed Philip's hair, and spoke to him as if he were still alive. Whenever they arrived in a town, she would ask, "Are there any beautiful women here?" If the answer was yes, she would immediately change course. Unwilling to risk Philip's soul being tempted, the people began to fear her. The nobles were at a loss, and Ferdinand, her aging father, returned, declaring that his daughter was no longer fit to rule. He ordered her confined in the royal convent of Tordesillas, where Joanna would live nearly 50 years in isolation, with no crown, no light, only a cold stone room and an iron bed. Legend says she slept holding a piece of silk cut from Philip's cloak, whispering words of marriage each night in her dreams. Ferdinand returns to power and builds the Habsburg Spanish Empire. With Philip gone and Joanna locked away, Ferdinand resumed ruling Castile as regent, while continuing as King of Aragon. This was the period when Spain was truly unified, a single monarchy linking the two largest realms of the Iberian Peninsula. Though Isabella had been the soul of the nation, Ferdinand was the one who prolonged its power after her death. He focused on administrative reform, establishing a centralized bureaucracy, and tightening control over towns and local councils, which had been highly fragmented under feudal rule. He also sent explorers to continue voyages to the New World, expanding colonies in the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America. In 1505, Ferdinand remarried a French princess, Germana de Foix, hoping for a male heir to pass the crown to, preventing it from falling into the hands of his grandson Charles, the child of Joanna, but the newborn died within days, and Ferdinand had to accept the inevitable. Charles, the son of the mad queen Joanna, and Philip would become the great heir. 1516 Ferdinand. Dies? Spain passes to a new generation. Ferdinand died in old age. No longer the dashing figure of his youth, he was buried in Granada beside Isabella. They had promised always to rest together in the city that had been the last stronghold of Islam. As a symbol of the Reconquista, the crown passed to Charles I of Spain, their 6-year-old grandson, who would later become Emperor Charles V, the ruler of the empire on which the sun never set. King of Spain, Holy Roman Emperor, and master of Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, and the Americas, but that is a story for another night. My friend, so, after Isabella's death, Spain did not plunge immediately into chaos, but walked as if in a fog, a guide Ferdinand. One cast aside, Joanna. One dead, unexpectedly, Philip, and a great future waiting Charles. It was a time of transition filled with struggle, tears, power, and shadows. But it laid the foundation for one of the most powerful empires in European history. If you are still awake, close your eyes and imagine the silent procession carrying Philip's coffin across the frozen plains, with the Mad Queen following behind, candle in hand, against the grey sky. The church bells toll, ringing cold, as histories lament an age where power, love, faith, and madness were knotted beyond undoing. In 1516, when King Ferdinand died, the united Spain temporarily fell into the hands of a 6-year-old boy living far away in the cold land of Flanders. Charles, son of Joanna of Castile and Philip the Handsome. His mother, as you know, remained imprisoned in the convent of Tordesillas, incapable of ruling. His father had been dead since Charles was 3 years old. Now Charles inherited the entire royal legacy from both sides. From his mother, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, along with all the New World colonies. From his father, Burgundy, the Netherlands, and the right to inherit the Holy Roman Empire from his grandfather, Maximilian I. Can you picture it? A shy teenager, not fluent in Spanish, arriving to rule one of the largest kingdoms in Europe. The day he first set foot in Spain, the people looked at him with caution. The nobles quietly harbored doubts. He seemed very much like an outsider. But don't let that awkward appearance fool you. For Charles was a man of destiny. In 1519, his grandfather Maximilian I died. And just months later, Charles was elected Holy Roman Emperor, becoming Charles V, the ruler of the largest territory in Europe at the time. From Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, Austria, to the German lands and the Americas, he reigned over more than half of the known world. And so, a great era began, but one also filled with countless crises, for the greater the power, the more numerous the enemies. The emperor and the three fronts that never slept. From the moment he took the throne, Charles V, three great challenges that he would grapple with until his abdication. External, the Ottoman Empire, under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, was expanding like a wildfire. The Turks besieged Vienna, conquered Hungary, and threatened all of Central Europe. Internal, a religious crisis erupted when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church, sparking the Protestant Reformation. The empire fractured. In the west, France, the eternal rival, under King François I, constantly schemed to seize Italy and the imperial crown. Charles no longer had time to play music or read poetry as he had in his youth in Flanders. Now, he became a soldier, a politician, and the most devoted Catholic of the century. The Italian Wars, where the emperor traded honor for faith. The decades-long war between Spain and France for control of Italy, the jewel of Europe. Charles was once defeated by François I and taken prisoner. But in turn, he also marched into Rome in 1527. unleashing one of the most horrific events in history, the sack of Rome, a bloody plundering by German mercenaries in Charles's army. All of Europe was shaken. The Pope was captured, churches burned, Charles grieved, but justified it. God had punished the Pope for allying with the French. The tension between his faith and the brutal realities of war tore ever deeper into his soul. Luther, Protestantism, and the inner battle of a Catholic king. While he fought in Italy and resisted the Turks, the Reformation spread through Germany like wildfire. Charles was a loyal Catholic, believing in the Pope's supreme authority. But as a multilingual ruler, he also understood the reasoning and desperation of his people. He once invited Martin Luther to debate at the Diet of Worms, where Luther defiantly refused to recant. Charles issued an edict banning him, but did not hunt him down as many expected. Knowing that force could not extinguish the flame burning in the hearts of the faithful, in the years that followed, he tried repeatedly to reconcile the two sides, but failed. This remained his greatest sorrow. He loved God, yet could not keep the church united. The New World, where gold poured in like a waterfall, and darkness followed. Under Charles, the Americas became Spain's vast resource base. Expeditions led by Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, bringing back hundreds of tons of gold and silver, flooding the Spanish treasury. But with it came the deaths of millions of indigenous people, the destruction of ancient civilizations, and genocides unprecedented in European history. Though thousands of miles away, Charles issued the first laws aimed at protecting native peoples rare among empires. Yet, as with religion, he wished to save, but was powerless before the conquering machine he himself had set in motion. At last, the weary king, in 1556, when he was over 50 years old, Charles V, who had once ruled over Europe and the Americas, fought France, battled the Ottomans, argued with Germany, and knelt before the Pope, suddenly announced his abdication. He split the empire in two to his son, Philip II Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, and the American colonies, to his brother Ferdinand the Holy Roman Empire and Austria. Then he retired to the monastery of Yuste, donned a monk's robe, and spent his final years as a hermit, tending the garden, reading the Bible, quietly reflecting on each mistake and glory of his life. A servant recounted, every day he would turn the hourglass himself, saying, "Time does not belong to the emperor, it belongs only to God." And thus ended an era. Charles V, the ruler of more territory than any since Charlemagne, from the Andes to the Danube, from the city of Toledo to the Ottoman frontier. But you know what? He died carrying no gold or silver, only a Bible, a pair of reading glasses, and a notebook listing the things he still wished to do but never had the chance. After abdicating in 1556, Charles V divided his world in two. The eastern part, the Holy Roman Empire, went to his brother Ferdinand. The western part, including Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, the Philippines, and all of the Americas, went to the son he once hoped would save the world, Philip II of Spain. Philip was then only 29, a calm, quiet, thin man with deep-set eyes and hair always neatly combed, dressed in black from head to toe. If his father Charles had been a warrior across the battlefields of Europe, Philip chose to rule from the shadows. He hated war, hated festivals, even hated the harsh sunlight. He loved solitude, cold stone walls, and the sound of prayers rising from the monastery. This king, in more than 40 years of rule, rarely left Spain. But his power stretched to Manila, Mexico, Naples, and Flanders. Philip II, the king of silence, control, and absolute devotion. Unlike his father, Philip had no interest in a multi-ethnic, multilingual empire. He wanted a homogeneous realm where all spoke Spanish, believed in the Roman Catholic faith, and were absolutely loyal to the throne. For Philip, religion was not just faith, it was the sole foundation of an orderly world. Immediately upon ascending the throne, he built El Escorial, a vast palace, monastery, mausoleum complex, 45 kilometers from Madrid. El Escorial was nothing like the opulent Versailles or the ornate Italian palaces. It was built like a fortress of grey stone, silent, cold, like a living tomb. Rumour had it that each night Philip II knelt in the chapel, reading the Bible for hours, tears falling on the stone carpet, and it was there he would die, quietly, among candlelight and church bells. But don't think a pious man cannot be ruthless. From the very start of his reign, Philip faced rebellion in the Netherlands, where the spirit of religious freedom and Protestant reform spread quickly. He accepted no form of compromise, and so blood was shed, a lot of it. He sent the Duke of Alba, known as the Butcher of the Netherlands, to punish the people. Thousands were executed. Many cities burned. Beneath the shadow of the cross, Spain plunged the Netherlands into a war that would last 80 years. The Dutch, once loyal to the Habsburgs, came to hate Spain, hate religion, and even hate God. It was a fracture that would never heal. Under Philip, the empire began to develop cracks, small ones, but deep. And then, Philip did the boldest thing in history. He challenged England itself. Recall this brief point: Joanna, mother of Charles V, had another daughter, Catherine of Aragon. She was the first wife of King Henry VIII of England. But when Henry cast her aside for Anne Boleyn, a religious conflict erupted, and England broke from the Catholic Church. When Philip II came of age, he was arranged to marry Queen Mary I of England, Catherine's daughter, to bring England back to Catholicism. This marriage terrified many English people. They called him the Spanish outsider, who would burn England with heresy and the Inquisition. Mary died, young and childless. Her successor was Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, who declared England a Protestant nation. For Philip, this was a slap in God's face. He could not forgive it. 1588. The Armada War. Philip's Holy Crusade failed before the wind. Philip began assembling the most powerful fleet ever mustered, with more than 130 warships, thousands of soldiers, weapons, priests, gold and silver, all for one goal: to invade England, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism. It was called La Armada Invencible, the Invincible Armada. But the heavens did not favour him. As the Armada entered the English Channel, England's lighter, more agile ships, under Francis Drake, harassed them wave after wave. Then came storms, hail, fierce winds, as if nature itself opposed Philip. Dozens of Spanish ships ran aground, sank, or drifted as far as Ireland. Barely a third returned alive. Philip received the news of defeat in his prayer room. He was silent. No shout. He simply turned to the holy statue and whispered, "I have done my part. The rest is God's will." But history is not as gentle as God. After this failure, the world began to doubt Spain. Once invincible, once trampling over blood to dominate the seas, from the peak of power, Spain began to decline, slowly, quietly, like the cold grey stones of El Escorial. The final years, a lonely king in a grand empire, Philip lost his beloved wife, lost his eldest son Don Carlos, rumoured to have gone mad and died, imprisoned, lost the Netherlands, lost the Armada. Even the American colonies no longer shone as before the natives rebelled. Disease spread, and the gold and silver reaching Spain was swallowed by war. In his small room at El Escorial, Philip lay bedridden with gout, his body twisted, limbs swollen, unable to walk. Yet every morning, he still requested a statue of the Virgin Mary to touch and pray before it. A servant said he never asked about the world. He only asked, "How many souls today need prayers?" In 1598, Philip II breathed his last. No drums, nor cannons, only a small hymn whispered in the dark. He was buried in the crypt of El Escorial, where his remains still lie today, among candles that never go out, like the faith that never left his heart. And my friend, that is how a long chapter of Spain's history closed. From the blinding brilliance of Charles V's empire to the solemn church bells in the darkness of Philip II, an age where gold and blood flowed together, where God was prayed to on the battlefield, and where a devout king could kill thousands simply to save their souls.